Hi, everyone. We're just going to give it a minute before we make a proper start so that everyone's got a chance to join. We're expecting quite a few people today, close to 100, and we've only got 10 at the moment. So we'll just let everyone have a chance to drop in. Are you in the office there, Magella, today?
I am. I've come
Yeah.
in for, well, what I thought was going to be a bit of peace and quiet, but it's actually quite busy today.
Oh, no.
We're definitely
Yeah.
noticing the difference, like trying to get a coffee in the morning from Pret. The queue was out the door this morning.
Was
So
it really?
yeah, it's
It's
so
so
much busier.
it's so funny, isn't it? It's like things like that that seemed normal before. Like because I'm working from home still, and yeah, even when I'm on a busy tube, it's like, oh, it's so busy.
Yeah. But it made me think, I hate it so much now that we got used to it being much quieter. It did make me think like, was I completely used to this before? And why didn't we ever question it?
Yeah, yeah, I know. I think we were just used to a different level of
Yeah,
busyness before, weren't we?
exactly. Um,
Okay. Got quite a few people on the online now, which is great.
I'm
We'll
actually
give it,
really impressed with how on time everybody is.
yeah, considering it's first thing in the morning,
Mhm.
everybody wants to improve their CV, it seems.
Good. That is what I'm here to help with.
Exactly. It was a great session last year. I remember it actually when we ran this one last year. And there tends to be, we find a lot of people interested in watching the recording as well,
Yeah.
which is great. Okay, I think we're going to make a start now. So, hi everyone. Welcome to Peabody's Online Jobs and Apprenticeships Fair. I'm Yvonne and I work for Peabody. The session today that we have is on how to make your CV shine. And we're joined by Magella Burnett from Goodman Masson, who'll be delivering today's session. Just for you to know as well, the session is being recorded and will be made available on Peabody's YouTube channel. You just need to search Peabody London on YouTube and you'll find our page. We will hear from Magella today, not from me, before we open up for Q&A. And so if you have any questions at all about anything that's been presented, just pop them into the Q&A box at the very bottom of the screen, and we'll try to get through as many questions as we can. There's also a chat function, and you can leave any comments in the chat as well. Before we start as well, I'd particularly like to welcome any Peabody residents who are on the call today, and just to remind you that all Peabody residents have access to our expert one-to-one free career service for all residents. And there's more information on our website if you go to the Peabody website and look for employment services. I'm going to hand over now to Magella to kick off.
Thank you so much, Yvonne, and thank you everybody who's joined the session today. I really hope that it proves to be useful and can teach you something new. I imagine that the Q&A at the end tends to be the place that you can ask the burning questions that you've had. I'm very happy to stick around, a little longer for anybody who has some extra questions. So as Yvonne previously said, my name's Magella Burnett. I work for Goodman Masson. I've been here for the last 4 years. Recruitment is what Goodman Masson does, but so much more than just helping our clients to fill the vacancies that they have. So Goodman Masson has been operating since 1994, so we're pretty old. Our main office is in London, and that's where the bulk of our workforce is. But we have since branched out nationally and really excitingly, more recently, internationally. So we have growing offices in Germany and in New York. I haven't visited yet, but as soon as stuff opens up, I certainly plan to do so. Um, on top of the recruitment services that we provide to companies like Peabody, lots of other nonprofits, housing associations, and big commercial businesses too, we try to really position ourselves as a company who add value to our clients. And that can be everything from webinars about improving your CV, using LinkedIn to the best of its ability, whether it's to do with the benefits of mentoring and how mentoring can help progress you within your career path. My specialism today is going to be how to make your CV shine. So I'm going to jump straight in to the first slide. So this is a little bit of an overview of what this session is going to go through. My screen is just up here, so please forgive me for looking around the room. So initially, this is the bit that people don't consider, is the research before you even start writing your CV. So many people have a standard CV that they will send out to wildly different jobs with different requirements. And so it really is so important to do your research on the company that you're applying to be with and the role itself before putting it together. How to structure a really standout CV, which is going to capture the attention of the person reading it straight away. How to format your CV for a really kind of professional look. And that is the real basics, from the font that you decide to use to the way that you structure, qualifications, your name, and then your experience. How to make sure that you're grabbing the attention of an employer, and how to detail work experience and education and where to put that on the first page. So why should you care about this? Why can you not just use one standard CV and send it out to every single job that you want to apply for, which may be 10 to 20 every week with how many jobs are available at the moment? Well, the average is 6 seconds. You might have heard this before. It's quite a commonly discussed fact. Recruiters and hiring managers spend an average of 6 seconds. I certainly, as my job, it is to go through CVs, and straight away you do become able to figure out who has been able to tailor their CV and who's gone to that extra effort and which is a really generic one. So it is so important that you differentiate yourself from those who will just send out any old CV that isn't tailored to the position. And you also need to make sure that you're targeting the person that you're applying to work for. They need the information that is relevant to their company straight away. We'll go into this in a bit more detail, but that could be everything from if you have experience within a relevant sector, put that towards the top of your CV or towards the top of the list of responsibilities listed under a certain position. Okay, so formatting tips. These are the real basics, but it is incredibly important. And I can tell you, I have seen some incredibly funky, very colorful, very artistic font on CVs. Actually, that's not the right way to go about it. And that's not necessarily what will make your CV stand out in the way that you would want it to. So you do want to have a crisp font color. Go with black. Always go with a standard black or automatic. And you want to keep the font exactly the same throughout. We would always recommend Calibri or Cambria, perhaps Arial as well, is a very nice, easy to read, clean font, more so I think than Times New Roman, which I see on a lot of profiles. You don't want to be using, like I said before, very artistic or cartoony font like Comic Sans or some of those other curly ones, which I can't remember the name of. And you always want to try to keep it to 2 pages is the standard. Now, again, when you have more experience, or you may have worked in a lot of temporary or interim positions, we completely appreciate that that can be really, really difficult to compress the experience that you have into just 2 to 3 pages. There are ways that you can go about that. And further back, experiences will need to start deteriorating in the amount of information that you provide for each role and the number of bullet points. A little later in this, Yvonne will very kindly share a couple of CVs, and I'll show you an example of exactly what I mean by this. And then you do want to bold out your headings. So that will be everything from your education and your qualifications to the organizations and job titles that you worked for, just to make sure that they're really standing out, the dates are clear, the job title is clear, and then it brings the eye down towards the bullet points beneath each of those responsibilities. Right, so I cannot emphasize the importance of this. I know I keep banging on already about not having one generic CV for every role. completely appreciate that it is really time consuming to tweak and change your profile for each of the slightly different jobs that you might be applying for. However, it will absolutely make you stand out, and it will also prove your motivations for applying for the position. Not that you've just seen something that looks a little bit relevant when you're searching through Reed. It will show that there is a want and an active desire to work for this business and to tailor your CV to that company. And certainly for me as a hiring manager, I hugely respect and appreciate that. And you can tell the difference. So, some of the top tips for making sure that you do your research beforehand is LinkedIn is a fantastic tool. I don't know how many of you use it. You don't need to have LinkedIn Recruiter or LinkedIn Premium to have access to do this sort of research, but you can you can search rather for any company within LinkedIn, Peabody, for example, and you can have a look at the profiles of the people who work there. So if you're applying for a finance position, you can see the background of your potential colleagues and hiring managers. You can see the industry background that they have had, how many years they've worked for Peabody. But within that, you can also see company statistics. You can see things like um, attrition rate, turnover, whether that company has grown in the last 12 months or whether they've actually declined in size. And all of these things become very relevant when you're positioning your CV to highlight key achievements, for example. If you have experience working for a growing business and your research has given rise to the fact that this business has grown by, let's say 10% in the last 12 months, that is something that's very relevant. Your opening statement and your summary can acknowledge that, I'm applying for X position within Peabody, a company that I can see has grown by this percentage in the last 12 months. I have experience with in a similar setting, just to give you an example. And that is really tailored and will certainly impress any hiring manager. The skills which are in demand for those target roles. So again, if we're taking Peabody or other housing associations as an example, what are the things that are going to make you valuable? What are the key bits of experience? Do they have a really ambitious growth strategy for the next few years? Or is it these, again, to use a finance example, is it these really long term, up to 30-year financial forecasts and budgets that housing associations will put together? Those are the sorts of things that you will need to make sure that you go away, have a look at them, have a look at their annual report and financial statements, have a look at their strategy if there is one on the website. And that will also educate you in how to position your CV and which key achievements and experiences to highlight. And I'll come on a little bit later to how to bring attention to key achievements and not just the bullet points to describe your role responsibilities. And then focusing the CV around these, of course, it's back to basics. Where do you position them within the structure of your CV? A real top tip is doing a separate section for 2 to 3 key achievements in each role. I think that's something that I've had so much feedback from hiring managers. They love to see that and they love to have attention brought to it by structuring it in a slightly separate way. Industry specific skills, IT systems and knowledge. This is relevant in every single position that you will apply for, whether it is a business intelligence analyst, something really techy and IT specific, whether it's finance, whether it's programs or communications. We all, especially in the wake of working from home for the last 18 months, we really need to show that we are IT literate. You don't even necessarily always have to have used that company's system. If you haven't, demonstrate the fact that you've gone into other businesses previously and picked up a brand new system really quickly, and prior knowledge with multiple different systems has helped you be able to do that. The language that you use, this is very important. I think a lot of the time I will read on people's profiles some quite kind of personal information, or sometimes people might want to be quite jokey and have a jovial tone. in the CV, that is absolutely something which should be in a cover letter, which is separate to a CV. CV should be a very professional, matter-of-fact document which highlights your education background, your qualifications, your roles, and your role responsibilities and key achievements. Your chance to have that kind of rapport and build that sort of thing does come with a cover letter or in an interview setting. So make sure that the language you use is very much professional and matter of fact about that particular position. And finally, your qualifications. Loads of people will put these towards the bottom of your CV. It is so important that you make sure that you have those on that first page of the profile. You want to have your summary or personal statement, whatever it is that you'd like to call it. Of course, your name and location is also a good one. Education background and qualifications. Then you move on to describing your career history and role responsibilities. So this is the part, because you can all see how blurry that is. I'm going to stop sharing my screen and ask Yvonne if she would. Are you able to share the CVs there, Yvonne? I can give you guys a couple of examples. Go on, Yvonne. Sorry, just unmute yourself there. I couldn't catch that.
Classic COVID mistake to make. Are you able to stop sharing there, Magella, and then I will
Yes.
share? Excellent, great. These are the joys of Zoom. Here we go. This is A.
Brilliant. Thank you
That's okay.
very much. So CVA, I've anonymized this. This is our standard formatting. So you'll see it does have the Goodman Masson header. Of course, your CVs won't have this, but this is the most kind of in your face, very straightforward example of what I mean by how to structure a CV. So this is a finance person, and the first thing on there is the name, their location, and then straight away it goes to their professional qualification and education. Brilliant. This is exactly what we're after. If we go down to the second page, you see that it will go straight into where they work and the key responsibilities. Now, this candidate chose to give us a bit of an overview of their position and then highlight a few of the key bullet points and the key things that they wanted our attention being brought to. And he's been very consistent throughout with each of the roles. You see it starts with a summary, gives a few of the key bullet points. And look, this person has a lot of experience. It is really difficult to condense and compress all of those years of experience into, 3 to 6 bullet points this candidate has given for each different role. That really is exactly what we are after as recruiters, and they have successfully been able to keep this CV to within 3 pages. 2 to 3, as we said before, is the guideline. What they have chosen not to do is put key achievements under each specific role, and our feedback to this particular individual was that that would have been the one thing that we thought could have been a really valuable addition to the CV. Whereas I believe he's chosen to put it right at the bottom of the CV, alongside, there we go, yeah. So key skills and expertise and a few of the other responsibilities and non-executive directors or board memberships that this person holds. He still has his key skills and experience on his profile, and that's fantastic. However, you had to scroll all the way to the bottom to see that. And if we revisit the 6 seconds fact, ideally, we want that to be consistent underneath every position. And it does bring the attention to those things throughout the whole CV. There's a risk that this person, if a hiring manager was really, really in a rush, which you would like to think doesn't happen, but unfortunately, I think sometimes it is the case, they didn't pick up on those key achievements. They didn't go all the way to the very bottom of the CV. And even if they did, they wanted to make it clearer which achievement is related to which specific position. But as an example, I think this is a really strong profile, very clear font, the bold highlights, FCCA, for example, at the top, that's their professional qualification. They're applying for a finance job. Brilliant. That I would say, to you guys is a brilliant example of what you would try to make your CV emulate. B is one, and by no means a bad CV or a bad profile. Again, we've put this in our standard format so that we've got name, professional qualifications, education background right on that front page. But if we scroll down and go through this individual's responsibilities a little bit more, you will see that, most recent position, it is a short-term role. However, we've got one bullet point for all of these most recent positions. And, this second position, for example, the Director of Finance and Resources, it's very kind of, there's a lot of information in that one bullet point. Ideally, we would want to be separating this out because there's some really good stuff in there. Managing to covering multiple different departments, supporting a modernization program. For this particular individual, that was incredibly relevant to the role that they were applying for and would have been really valuable to have made those more hard-hitting and making them very clear simply by separating that out into a second bullet point. But I think a lot of this got a little lost within the structure of this CV. And again, if we keep going down, we can see that even in some of the longer term positions, there's a lot of information there, lots of text, and then it will switch to very little information for a role that the person had been doing for a longer period of time. They do, in fact, have a few major achievements which they've highlighted, which I absolutely love. As you can probably tell, I'm a big fan of highlighting this sort of thing. But there is a real lack of consistency with this profile. So I would use this as an example. Again, fantastic application, fantastic background, and loads of great content. But the structure of this profile does not bring the attention and bring the eye to the relevant things that this hiring manager will need to look for. So completely appreciate it sounds so simple and so basic to do this, but do really make sure that you are getting that balance right between which job do you choose to provide more information for? Well, I, as a hiring manager, would always want to know your most recent few roles, and particularly the ones that you might have been in for a longer period of time, 3 to 5 years. With one bullet point, that really isn't much information. But then you might have 6 or 7 for a job that you were in for 6 months. Thank you so much, Yvonne. I'm going to try to see if I can share the rest of my screen, but you might all have to bear with me just for a second. Let's have a look. Is that sharing for everyone?
That's great.
Great.
Angela.
I thought this is not one of my strong points, so not something I would be putting on my CV. Okay, so I hope that those couple of examples were helpful. Any questions on those, pop them in the chat box, and I'll make sure that I come back to them and explain the reasoning behind that at the end of this session in the Q&A. So section by section, this is just a reiteration of the example that we just went through. Address, it still is important, particularly I know that we've made a move to a huge amount of remote working and almost 100% remote working for some businesses. But as certain organizations make a move to going back into the office, I do think that that is something which is important to make sure that you pop on there. Don't put on date of birth, marital status, and photographs. That's a really, really, really big no-no. I mentioned before that I have seen a few CVs which have some very personal information on there, which might be, I think I've once seen the number of children that somebody had and what the children's names were, whether they were married or not married. Like, that really isn't something that should be relevant, and it isn't relevant. We are really trying to make a move away in recent years from having any form of personal information influencing or guiding somebody's ability to apply for a position, and it simply just isn't relevant. You want to have everything on a level playing field. It also detracts from remaining purely professional and focused on the application for a specific job. So I'd really advise against that. Putting a full address is also, it's just not necessary. I think the general location, really helpful. We don't want to be putting kind of a full address on there, if nothing else, for GDPR. You do want telephone number. You would be really surprised the number of CVs that I've seen which only have an email address. And if someone's trying to get in touch with you to discuss a position that you've not been in touch with before, it very often goes into junk. There have been so many candidates who've missed out on opportunities because they simply didn't see my email and I wasn't able to reach them on their phone. So a little bit more on the sections. We definitely want to make sure that the industry specific skills or system skills, you would have seen on that second CV, the systems use was right up at the top. Again, this particular position that they were applying for really did have a preference for a particular finance system. And so that was great. It demonstrated it right at the beginning. Anything else that you need, anything else that would be relevant to that position, particularly relevant experience that you have, put it in the personal statement, have your key achievements at the top of your CV rather than candidate A's, who was all the way to the bottom. And the role specific ones, as mentioned before, you want to weave those in. So ideally, if you've got your job title, a few bullet points on the responsibilities for each of those roles, at the bottom of that role description and role responsibilities, that would be where is the best place to put 1 to 3 key achievements, depending on how long you were in that role for. And make it role specific. This is really, really obvious. I've mentioned it to you guys a few times now. You don't need to name the organization that you're applying for. You don't need to go quite to that extent. But if you know that they're looking for somebody who has used, a particular system, or that within the job description, it mentioned that they are putting together some new strategic objectives and they want to achieve X, Y, Z by 2025, and you have relevant experience doing something similar, absolutely, that is what you want to be highlighting. I potentially think this is a little bit harsh because being a good team player is a real bonus, and that is definitely a valuable asset for anybody applying for a position. But you can appreciate those terms are really, really commonly used. And this presentation is called them cliche. But I would advise you to try to slightly reword things like that. So rather than a good team player, even as simple as, very effective working as part of a team, or enjoys working collaboratively with other team members across the business. It's a little bit of extra effort and quite basic, but I would recommend you try to avoid those very standard terms that you see on lots of CVs. The key skills, always bullet pointed, like we said, candidate B, it was within a bullet point, but there were 3 sentences within that one point. And, the value of that fantastic experience was a little lost because it wasn't separated out. These are short, concise, to the point, really easy to read snippets, as it says here, of your relevant information. Back to those 6 seconds. People who, particularly with how the market is at the moment, it's the busiest I've ever seen it in about 7 years of doing this job. People are going through a huge amount of CVs. And so making sure that you're short, sharp, to the point is really, really key. And it will help massively make sure that you're getting those hard-hitting, really important pieces of experience across. The work experience always should be chronological from most recent to your earliest career history. This spreadsheet has put 5 to 10 bullet points per role. Now, That is a really good steer. However, like that second example CV I showed you, or Yvonne showed you, they had years and years of experience, many of which were in shorter term interim positions. It's almost impossible to put 5 to 10 bullet points because otherwise you'd have a 20-page CV. So I completely appreciate that some of you guys on this call today may not be 3 jobs in. You might have loads more experience than that, a wealth of experience, which is enormously valuable. My advice there would be to try to keep that CV to a reasonable length. It is really, a useful tool as you get further and further back. Decrease the number of bullet points and decrease the amount of description that you're giving for your roles. If it was something which was like 10, 15, 20 years ago, I would recommend putting one summary bullet point of what that position was as a maximum, and that will really help you keep it down. And as we've said before, round off each role with an achievement. It's really, I think it also shows that you're going to the extra effort of highlighting the things that you're really proud of. An achievement is something that you went above and beyond to obtain and to achieve. And that's a great trait in a potential employee. So it says something about your nature and how you approach your roles by highlighting those things, as well as bringing the attention to something really valuable and really interesting for that hiring manager to read rather. So I'm whizzing through a little bit because I realize we're quite short for time. I want to make sure I've got time for your Q&A at the end. Experience and education, as we've said, that really does need to be at the top of your CV. I can't emphasize that enough. Ultimately, if it isn't, we'll be scrolling right down to the bottom to make sure that we can be clear on that. There are roles where education won't be relevant and it is all about your experience. But again, I still think it is about consistency and about the structure. And before you apply for the position, tailor. And I know I'm asking all of you to spend a huge amount more time on the jobs that you're applying for. It's very easy these days when you've got websites like Reed and Indeed. Even for me, I work in the nonprofit sector. Charity jobs is a real go-to. Some of you might spend a lot of time looking on it as I do. You can send your CV, one-click application, I think it's called on some websites. It gets your profile across there, absolutely. But it's not the approach that you want to be having. And it doesn't scream to that employer, wow, this person has clearly gone away and done their research. They've really tailored their experience to what we've put on our job description. The motivation is clearly here for this individual, and they've put in the extra effort to have a job with us. We as recruiters as well, if I am being brutally honest and really frank, there are, you do start to see the same kind of CVs, the same names applying to wildly different jobs on all different ends of the spectrum. And, that is not a position I think that represents or positions yourself as an individual that well. It shows that the application is just going absolutely anywhere that might be the right salary. And, sometimes there are individuals who I don't think actually read the detail of the position. They spelling it sounds so basic, but again, when we are now moving so much more towards working from home, a lot more is done on Zoom and on Teams. But loads more is done on email. I'm certainly lots more emails going to and fro, whereas previously I would just have an internal meeting or pick up the phone. So I think you really do want to be running a spell checker on absolutely everything. Sounds basic, but you would be so surprised the number of typos I see and have to then kind of go back and ask people to correct those, which you feel a little bit rude doing, but it is definitely for their benefit. I don't know how many of you heard of Grammarly. Not only is that brilliant for a spell checker, but it will give you loads of different options of synonyms for different words. For example, if you're trying to avoid saying something like great team player, it will give you, like a thesaurus, basically, some other options of what phrases that you could use. It will also make suggestions on how to improve your syntax and how you've put together the sentence or the descriptor about your previous positions or your key achievements. Ask a friend or ask a recruitment consultant. We absolutely, it's a very two-way process. And I think that we as consultants are not doing our job properly if we don't offer this 2 minutes of our time. It's a small value add, but it really can help make the difference between whether or not you will successfully get an interview or position your CV as best you possibly can for a role. Or, there are things that could have been improved, but you didn't ask somebody to take a look. So if you guys are using recruitment consultants, have relationships with Goodman Masson or the many, many other agencies out there that there are, ask a recruiter to have a look over your CV if there isn't a friend that can take a minute to have a glance over it. Right, I think I've left us with just about enough time for the Q&A. So I will stop sharing my screen. I hope that was helpful, guys. I'll hand over to Yvonne, I think, before we go into questions.
Oh, that was fantastic. I've learned quite a few things then as well, Nigella. So really helpful. We've got quite a few questions. I don't know if we can actually get through all of them, but let's see. Someone asked today, if you've had less than 10 years career experience, do you think we should keep our resumes to 2 pages maximum?
Yes, I do. And actually, less than 10 years experience is probably when you're positioned much easier to keep your CV to 2 pages. I don't know if that question was more from a perspective of it might be difficult to fill 2 whole pages, or if you don't have quite as much experience, is it better to just keep it to 1? My answer is definitely no. I think that 1 is too short, unless you are, a school leaver or a graduate. If you have some work experience, whether it's 2 to 10 years, absolutely make sure that you are giving a good amount of detail, like we said before, 5 to 10 bullet points for each position.
Perfect. Someone else has asked, if I am changing careers and do not have work experience, should I prioritize showing my education?
That's a really good question. If you are completely changing careers, you still absolutely need to go through the prior experience that you had in the unrelated field to what you want to get into. But what I would advise you want to do there, we always want to kind of put the education towards the top of the CV anyway. But instead of having, key achievements perhaps as the second thing that you put before going into the different work experiences, I would recommend that you put the relevant transferable skills or any courses that you might have done which are relevant to the field that you're trying to get into. Make sure that is the first thing that strikes the person reading that CV. This is also a really good example of the importance of a personal statement. When you're trying to make a completely different move, be honest about that and acknowledge that in your personal statement. You don't want to go into too much detail. I would say 1 paragraph max for a personal statement, which is on the CV. This is different to a cover letter. You want to explain how much you want to get into this industry and what your motivation is for doing so.
Great, that makes sense. And how would you explain a gap in your CV? Someone's asked, for example, if you're a carer or a parent.
That's also a really good question. I do get asked that quite a lot. I would recommend acknowledging it on your CV. Now, completely appreciate that some of those reasons are quite personal, not things that people would want or feel comfortable to share, nor should they be expected to do so. However, what I have seen, I'll try to find an example and it can be circulated after this session if it would be helpful. I've seen CVs where they put the dates of unemployment for whatever reason it might be. And there has been a bullet point which had said, might be travel, or some people are a bit more open and they feel comfortable saying, caring for a relative, or maternity leave, for example. Some individuals simply put personal sabbatical, which I tend to find is a better way of phrasing it than not putting anything at all, because hiring managers 90% of the time will kind of ask, oh, you mind me asking what was the reason for that gap?
Well, I did actually see on CVB, the second one, the poor
Yeah.
example, that that person had sabbatical actually because of cancer treatment. I think I saw, which is quite sad, but
Yeah,
it felt very honest.
it's very honest. And um, I actually have a huge amount of respect for anybody that is open enough to put something like that. Um, Please don't think that that is absolutely necessary. If you really don't want to, you very much don't need to do it. But yeah, you're right, Yvonne. I thought that that kind of, tackled it head on
Mm.
and explained that gap.
Um, this is one a lot of people can relate to, I think, for parents. What if you don't have any recent work history and have been spending like many years raising a family and now getting back into work? In that situation, what would you advise people in terms of their resumes?
I think it's quite similar to the previous question. Make sure that you put from, this date to present, um, whether it's maternity leave or paternity leave, or you just want to say raising raising a family. Um, there is There's absolutely no shame in that. It's certainly more difficult than my job. So I think this is another quite similar example of tackling something head on and putting that on your CV. Some people might have been doing courses, or even if it's helping their other half or helping a family business with certain activities, and they choose to highlight that because it's still very relevant. Whether or not it's been something to do with keeping up with Excel, or it's system skills, or it's something else entirely. Some people have chosen, even if they haven't been employed full time or even volunteering, they do want to bring attention to some of the things that show they've been kind of keeping things going with professional experience specifically.
Sure. And this is related again, but someone's asked if you're taking a career break due to health reasons, would you explain that in your personal statement?
Again, the extent to which you provide an explanation completely depends on what you feel comfortable doing. I would never want to encourage anybody to go into detail that they didn't really want to do, because these things are really personal. So it can be as simple as personal sabbatical if you really don't want to give any more information, or it could be, taking leave due to illness. Um, I actually would advise against going into huge amounts of detail. But if you wish to detail, like candidate B did on their CV, career break due to receiving treatment for cancer, I would advise that's kind of the extent of the detail that you would want to go into. Um, so I don't know if I have a specific answer for that. Really, it is whatever you're comfortable with.
It sounds like it's highly personal, isn't it?
It
Depending on,
is,
yeah,
yeah.
on the person. Okay. So we've got a couple of questions here about length, but one here about I don't have many professional qualifications or a lot of job experience. What
Mhm.
else do you think you can add to your resume? So this is the opposite now. If you haven't got much, what would you recommend?
Your transferable skills. What are your key achievements? What makes you an employable candidate? Because yes, we don't all have degrees, we don't all have master's degrees, or project management skills um, in the form of a professional qualification. So in that vein, my advice would be, whether it is really, really excellent um, team building skills, or sorry, not team building, relationship building skills. Um, all of our jobs, again, particularly the importance of trying to build relationships virtually, it is so different. I've certainly found it very different trying to do that in my role. Um, that's a really valuable skill set. And that's something that I think would be relevant for absolutely every single job that we could be applying for. Or you might be particularly savvy with IT, you might be great with Excel. You might be absolutely fantastic with admin, and you are the most organized person in the world, and can keep the team's, calendar, whatever it is, up to date. So there will always be something that you can bring attention to. If it's not prior education, and it's not loads of different really senior jobs that you've had, there will always be key achievements and key skills that you can highlight in your profile.
No, that makes sense. So a couple of questions here, more related to the length of a CV. So someone's asked, is a 3-page CV too long for an admin role if you're applying for administration role?
It completely depends on how much experience you have. I do think for those candidates who are, 1 to say 4 jobs into their career, I do think it's possible to fit that onto 2 pages. However, I appreciate even if somebody has only been working for maybe 3 years, they might have had loads of interim jobs, and it is really, really tough to do that. I would need to probably know a little bit more about how far into the career you are and how many prior roles that you've had. But as a general rule of thumb, I know the presentation said 2. 3 pages is absolutely fine. I would never fall off my chair if someone sent me a 3-page CV, that's for sure.
10 pages on the other hand.
10 pages, bit of an issue.
Okay. So again, this is related to the length of a CV. So this person said that they've kept a job for 7 years, but all of their other jobs were very short. They were all sort of all between a few months and less than a year. And they're worried that and potential employers may not see them as very reliable. So what advice would you give them about how to structure that in their CV?
So it can be as simple as a lot of people specify that it was an interim position. A lot of the time, you might have been in a role for, could be as little as 3 months, it could be even shorter. It could be like 6 or 9, and you've just put, job title. I do finance, hence why I keep using finance job titles as an example. But let's say it's a management accountant, and you've got loads of different jobs, and you were only kind of in them for 3 to 6 months each. When I see those CVs, I do wonder, were they interim or was there something that went on? Did they choose to leave early? Whereas if people have specifically put interim management accountant, some people even put in brackets that they were extended, then that takes away the question as to why you've had those shorter term roles, and I think helps address that issue of reliability. Another piece of advice on how to tackle that, again, it could be a very brief mention in your personal statement, whether it is, I've been a professional interim for the past X years, I am now looking to get back into the permanent market. That answers the question.
Perfect. This one's about professional certifications and qualifications. Should I display a professional certificate number on a CV, for example, a Prince 2 certificate?
I don't believe it's necessary personally. Those sorts of checks and compliance things, they come, upon receiving an offer for a job. Pre-employment checks, they're very standard. I've certainly never seen a CV that didn't have, a professional qualification number and thought, well, they must not be telling the truth, or I've then had to go and ask them for proof of that. I don't think that's necessary, no.
Sure. Someone's here got a question about salaries. So if a company is asking for your salary expectation, I think that's what they mean. What would you suggest that the candidates actually says if they haven't got any local experience and they may be from overseas?
Okay, so that's an interesting question. Just because of the differentiation, between somebody with local experience versus someone who might have worked locally. So the general kind of rule of thumb with when you're asked about salary expectations, you obviously want to make sure that you don't say something wildly above the salary that is on offer for the job that you've applied for many, many reasons. The obvious ones being, it just looks like you haven't done your research. And that would kind of personally annoy me a little, because you've given your own time, but you've also taken their time in an interview setting for something that they just can't afford to pay you. The differentiation, though, between the difference of somebody who might have worked locally or in a really relevant field versus somebody from overseas or from a different industry background. It depends, honestly, it has to be what you're happy with. And you always have to keep that at the bottom of everything that you're thinking to do with salary. Now, if it's a step up or if it's something you don't have experience in, the likelihood is you are not going to go in at the top of that salary banding. And that is not just from the employer's perspective. That should also be from your perspective, because what room do you have to then grow in that role and receive an increase in your salary in recognition of your performance and the growth that you're having within those responsibilities as you tick off more of those key things. But you equally don't want to undersell yourself. So you really do need, again, it's going back, do that research beforehand, look through the job description, understand what percentage of it can you do and what percentage of it would be new skills or things that you would need to develop into. This is very kind of maybe accountant's way of thinking, but it does come down to perhaps work out a percentage, and that will help educate you what level is fair for you to go in at within that salary bracket.
Sure, that makes sense. Actually, there's one here that I think I can answer, which is, do Peabody provide apprenticeships for those coming out of college in sixth form? We don't necessarily provide direct apprenticeships, although we do some. If you have a look on the Eventbrite page where you would have registered for today's session, we've actually got a number of other sessions focused on apprenticeships in different sectors. So sign up to those, but you can also contact our employment training service if you're a Peabody resident and get one-to-one free careers advice as well. We've got a question here around transferable skills and sort of how to structure these, how to list these. Could you provide any examples? Someone's just asked, they can't quite figure out how to put this on their CV.
The transferable skills. So could you just repeat the question, Yvonne? Sorry, I'm not sure I fully understand.
Yeah, no, that's okay. I'm just going to return to it if you give me one moment.
Thank you.
So this person's asked, can you please recommend a web page or a source of information on identifying transferable skills? A person can have lots, but it's hard to work out exactly which to put down.
It's a good question, and I absolutely agree with you. It is really hard to understand which are the key things I want to highlight when you're trying to keep a CV short, rather than putting absolutely everything on there. I don't have a recommendation of a site, I'm afraid, off the top of my head that I can provide now, which would kind of help you with this question. I can circulate a couple of resources, or again, I'll send through to Yvonne to circulate resources on how to tackle things like transferable skills when you might not have the exact skills for a job. But I think my advice on this would be, again, read the job description, do your research into the company, read their annual report, their strategy. In doing so, you will inevitably, it's impossible not to, if you're doing the proper amount of research, come across something that you think, oh, I've got really relevant skills for that, whether it is working with new clients, building relationships, or maintaining existing relationships. Or perhaps it's something to do with contract negotiation or bids and tenders. You don't necessarily have to have had experience in that specific area with like government bids and tenders before. But if you are somebody who has a real eye for detail, you're very analytical, you may have studied a particular subject which was very analytical, history, for example, or English. Those are all things which are, again, very relevant. So I hope that helps. I know it's a little bit more general, but again, it keeps coming back to making sure that you're doing that research.
No, that makes a lot of sense. Got a question here that might not be relevant to everybody, but someone's just asked, do you think companies might feel put off by women candidates between the ages of, say, 25 to 35 because they think they might be having children?
I myself fall into that bracket. And I totally get the question. It kind of kills me that so many of us in that bracket, we probably have a bit of a paranoia about that, and it's a real shame. I absolutely do not, particularly with how things have improved so much in the last 2 years that I've been doing recruitment, there is so much more of a focus on equality and inclusion in a recruitment process. You are simply not, number one, you are not allowed to discriminate. But number two, I really, really have faith that the cohort of people that might feel that way, I do think that they are diminishing. They still exist. I'm sure they do. But certainly within my market, um, absolutely the focus is making sure that people have a diverse workforce, that their recruitment process and the people that they're interviewing are a range of different people. You can't interview 100% men. You can't have a team which is 100% men, just as you shouldn't really have a team which is 100% any gender or racial background, or you don't want the same across the board in any situation. So I would really, really, I can promise you that from what I have seen, it's come on leaps and bounds in all walks of diversity and inclusion, not just women between 25 and 30. But I really am with you there. And I would say, please try not to worry about that. And I have not seen that be an issue the whole time I've been doing recruitment.
Yeah, I'm not sure if you'll agree with me, but if you're applying for a job where that does matter, maybe you don't want to work there anyway.
Exactly. I completely agree with you. Yeah.
Yeah. One last question here today, I think, before we wrap up. I've thought about this one too. If you're looking for a job within the creative industry, for example, in visual design, would you experiment then with layouts and graphics?
Oh, that's a really good question. I would straight away think not on your CV. That is when you should provide a separate cover letter. And that's a bit of a showcase of, if it's to do with graphic design or the creative side of things, that could break the rule of not putting any pictures or any kind of bright colors on a profile. Keep your CV professional, follow the advice from the call, from this meeting, but go to the extra effort of having a separate cover letter to showcase that experience. And a cover letter can be a great tool. It doesn't just have to be within the creative industry, it can be for anything, where you want to go into a little bit more detail, or you've gone over your 3-page limit on the CV.
Excellent. This is actually a question from me. If the job ad doesn't ask for a cover letter, would you suggest people include one anyway?
So for a permanent position, yes, I would actually. I think it really differentiates you and it shows a motivation there and that you really do want that job. You've gone to all that extra effort. For an interim position, unless it was a particularly long-term one, maybe 12, 18 months, even longer, I'd probably advise you not to, simply because an interim recruitment process moves so quickly. It moves so much more quickly that the reality is it may not get the attention that it deserves to have.
Sure, no, that makes sense. Wow, wonderful. Thank you. I think we've got through nearly 15 questions then. So thank you so much, Magella.
Thank you for having me.
No, you're so welcome. We're just about to wrap up now, but just wanted to remind everyone that we still have 19 more sessions similar to this, but on all sorts of different topics over the course of today and tomorrow. And you can register for those on the Eventbrite link that you would have used to register for today. The recording from this session today will be available on Peabody's YouTube channel. And you just have to search Peabody London on YouTube. And the PowerPoint presentation will be available on our website. Will you be sharing maybe one of the examples of the resumes as well, Magella, that we can share?
Absolutely, yeah.
Perfect.
Yes, I'll share a couple of bits and pieces that might be helpful.
Perfect. Yeah, and then also potentially any more links that we talked about today as well. They'll all be available on the Peabody website. So thank you so much.
Thank you very much, everyone. Thank you so much, Yvonne. Thanks, Peabody, for having me.
You're so welcome. We'll hope to see the rest of you later today and tomorrow as well. Bye.